Hollywood keeps trying to sell us the next big franchise, but when the budgets skyrocket and the box office bombs, they sweep the wreckage under the rug. These are the franchises so embarrassing, even the studios pretend they don't exist. In 2017, Universal bet big on the Dark Universe, hoping to turn their classic monsters into a Marvel-style cinematic empire. It launched with Tom Cruise as the face of the Mummy, but the only thing this movie buried was Universal's billion-dollar dreams. The film was a bland, personality-free action flick. Cruise and his team reportedly tore apart the original script, rewriting it into a vanity project that sidelined the actual monsters, and audiences noticed. With a $195 million budget, The Mummy needed to soar, but its box office was barely enough to break even. And Universal already announced the rest of the Dark Universe, complete with a star-studded cast photo: Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man, Javier Bardem as Frankenstein's monster, and Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll. But after The Mummy bombed as a franchise starter, the whole thing was quietly swept under the rug. Before Universal's Dark Universe fell apart, Lionsgate had already failed spectacularly at launching their own monster franchise. In 2014, they unleashed Frankenstein, a gothic mess starring Aaron Eckhart as Frankenstein's monster, somehow caught in a war between gargoyles and demons. Lionsgate clearly wanted their own underworld, but instead they delivered a painfully generic knockoff no one asked for. Even one of the underworld's co-writers worked on this disaster and still couldn't reach the heights of his own mid-tier series. Critics shredded it, giving it a whopping 5% on Rotten Tomatoes, and audiences stayed far away. The Mortal Instruments was supposed to be Sony's answer to Twilight. Cassandra Clare's books had a huge fan base, and Jamie Campbell Bower was smoldering hot, maybe not Robert Pattinson hot, but close, and yet it flopped. Critics ripped it apart for leaning on every young adult cliché in the book. Fans hated the lack of chemistry between Jamie Campbell Bower and Lily Collins. The title didn't help either. The Mortal Instruments and City of Bones? Cool on their own. Jam them together, and it's confusing. People thought it was the Mortal Engines movie with walking cities. Instead, they got an awkward, supernatural romance no one asked for. With a $60 million budget, it barely scraped $95 million at the box office. Far too little for a franchise starter. All sequels were ultimately canceled. Long before Marvel and DC mastered the superhero formula, Hollywood tried and failed with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. On paper, it sounds amazing. Victorian-era superheroes like Alan Quatermain, Dorian Gray, and Dr. Jekyll team up to save the world. But on screen, it was a train wreck. The 2003 film had a solid cast, including Sean Connery in his final live-action role. Yes, this movie was so bad, it drove Connery into retirement. Director Stephen Norrington, same story. After clashing with studio execs and hating the experience, he swore off directing forever. And hasn't made a film in 20 years since. Critics tore League apart, and audiences weren't much kinder. A sequel, teasing the League battling the Martian tripods from War of the Worlds, was quietly canceled. The movie did turn a profit, earning $179 million on a $78 million budget, but even Hollywood knew some disasters aren't worth repeating. The Golden Compass wasn't just a failure, it was a $180 million disaster. On paper, it had everything: Nicole Kidman, Daniel Craig, and a beloved book series with a massive fan base. But on screen, it was a clunky mess that couldn't figure out what it wanted to be. Fans of Philip Pullman's novel were furious at how much was cut, while newcomers couldn't make sense of the tangled story. And let's not forget the controversy. Religious groups boycotted the film over its perceived anti-religious themes, putting even more pressure on its already sinking U.S. box office. Despite making $372 million worldwide, it flopped so hard in the U.S. that New Line Cinema didn't even bother with sequels. In the early 2000s, Hollywood was desperate for its next Lord of the Rings and thought it found it in Eragon. With a huge budget and a built-in fan base from Christopher Paolini's best-selling novels, it had all the makings of a franchise juggernaut. Instead, it became a $100 million lesson in how not to adapt a book. Critics shredded it, citing poor acting, laughable dialogue, and a generic plot. Fans of the book were outraged, especially after the movie butchered its ending. The box office wasn't a total disaster with $249 million worldwide. Director Stephen Fangmeyer believes that Fox was modestly happy with the worldwide box office. However, modestly happy isn't cutting it when you want the next Middle-earth. No sequels ever happened, and Eragon was quickly sent to the same pop culture graveyard as The Golden Compass and Percy Jackson. Happened. Hollywood thought Jupiter Ascending would be the next Matrix, but it turned into one of the biggest franchise flops of all time. Directed by the Wachowskis, the film had a $176 million budget, jaw-dropping visual effects, and Mila Kunis as Jupiter Jones, a janitor who becomes queen of the universe. Sounds ambitious, right? Except the plot was a black hole of nonsense. Bees recognizing royalty and space politics no one cared about. Critics gave it a 27% on Rotten Tomatoes, audiences barely showed up, and the movie grossed just $184 million worldwide, barely enough to cover its budget. At Sundance, the surprise premiere was an embarrassment, with empty seats and walkouts. On paper, this reboot had it all. A $120 million budget, a talented young cast, and a promise to deliver a darker, more mature take on Marvel's first family. But behind the scenes, chaos. Director Josh Trank clashed with the studio. His vision was gutted by last-minute rewrites, and the final product was so bad that Trank publicly disowned it before the movie even premiered. The result? A 9% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a dismal $167 million global box office. Not even enough to justify the effort. The franchise didn't just fail, it imploded. Marvel fans are now pinning their hopes on the MCU's upcoming reboot. With Pedro Pascal and rumors of a Robert Downey Jr. cameo, it's already poised to be a billion-dollar hit. But after this disaster, Fantastic Four has a lot to prove. Disney poured $263 million into this bloated sci-fi epic, expecting a franchise to rival Star Wars. Instead, they delivered one of the biggest box office bombs in history. The marketing was a disaster. Vague trailers, posters that told audiences absolutely nothing, and a title so generic it might as well have been Guy with Sword. And the film itself was a convoluted adaptation of a pulp hero that no one remembered or cared about. Critics were lukewarm, audiences were confused, and Disney were $200 million in the hole. Plans for sequels evaporated faster than the film's box office earnings, and John Carter became the gold standard for how not to launch a franchise.